In this video, we are going to see a request flow of API gateway pattern. So we will examine a client request through the API gateway and onto the backend internal microservices and respond back to the client application again through the API gateway. So we will examine a particular request comes from the client application. Once the request comes to API gateway apply these items when requesting and redirecting the request to the internal microservices. Once the response back come to the data in API gateway again, API gateway execute the same steps and respond back to the client application. So we will examine all steps one by one. So in which steps we will touch during these requests. Let me start with the first item. The client send request to the API gateway, and this request is REST based HTTP API, but it also could be HTTP based GraphQL API. Once the request reaches the API gateway validates the incoming request, the first step. And after that, API gateway check the IP address is into IP allow listing or not. API gateway can provide allow listing and deny listing for IP based protections. After that, API gateway passes request to the identity provider in order to perform authentication and authorization. API gateway receives an authenticated session from the identity provider with validating token information. After that, API gateway checks the rate limiting based on the IP address and headers for the authenticated session. In example, API gateway can reject requests from an IP address exceeding a certain rate. And after that, API gateway routing requests to internal microservices with the service discovery feature. It performs route matching and redirect requests to the specific microservices. API gateway also transform requests to appreciate protocol for internal microservices with protocol conversions and send the transformed request to the internal backend microservices. For example, the incoming HTTP request in here could be transformed to gRPC for communicating with the internal microservices. This could handle in the API gateway. When the response comes back to the internal microservices to the API gateway get the response and proceed the same steps for respond back to the client application. During this process, API gateway perform cross-cutting concerns like monitoring and logging incoming and outgoing payloads and provides observability analytic services. An API gateway performs resilience patterns when communicating both client and the internal microservices, for example, performing the retry pattern, circuit breaker pattern, bulkhead pattern, and so on.